Hey, it's Scott Bertram, and I want to tell you about something new from Hillsdale College. It's the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. Check it out right now. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu. The Hillsdale College Podcast Network offers free nationwide access to all of Hillsdale's podcast content. That means shows like the Hillsdale Dialogues, the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, the Larry P. Arnn Show, and now, new, the Imprimis Podcast. You can listen wherever you are and whenever you want, and it's always free. Find out more about all of our shows at podcast.hillsdale.edu. You can subscribe to any program with new episodes delivered right to your device. Or sign up for the super feed. That means you get access to absolutely everything posted on the site. If you want to come close to stepping inside a Hillsdale College classroom, well, the Hillsdale College Podcast Network is for you. Get informed and get entertained at podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Bubble, a Hillsdale College career services production where we take you outside the classroom and into the professional arena to bring you special tips and tricks from recent alumni in all areas of practice. I'm Lauren Scott, and joining me today is Garrett West from Hillsdale's class of 2015. Thank you for joining me today, Garrett.
Glad to be here.
What does a day in the life look like at your job? Where do you work, and what is your position?
Sure. So I'm now an associate at a law firm in D.C., Paul Weiss, and I work mostly in the appellate group there. So my days are basically filled with writing briefs before various appellate courts. And just as a little bit of background, I think when most people think about the legal process, they think of what happens in trial courts or district courts across the country. That's where the jury would hear evidence or the judge would hear evidence and initially decide. After a decision is issued by the judge or the jury in one of those cases, often an appeal is brought to, if it's in the federal system, a court of appeal in one of the various regional circuits throughout the United States. And so the appeals are mostly focused on very discrete legal issues. There's a lot of you're able to challenge something that the court below apparently got wrong, and usually it focuses on maybe one, maybe just two things that were done wrong below, and mostly you will write a brief, the other side will write a brief, and then there will be a reply brief and an argument before a panel of judges. And so, again, I spend a lot of time thinking about what our brief should say and drafting those briefs and doing research for it and preparing my boss for argument.
When did you know that you wanted to go into law? Is this something that you've always kind of known, or something you decided while you were a student at Hillsdale?
I decided while at Hillsdale, actually. I had a friend who thought he wanted to go to law school, and he got some LSAT study books and took a practice test and then decided that law school really wasn't for him. And so he gave them to me, and I took a practice test and realized I was pretty good at it and figured, well, I might as well give it a shot. And so I got interested basically my sophomore year in college. And I thought, I'm a philosophy major. One thing I'm okay at is reading things that other people find boring. And so if that's what being a lawyer is, I think I should be able to excel in it.
How was the transition from being a Hillsdale student to becoming a law student?
It wasn't difficult, I would say. Hillsdale's really good preparation for law school because at Hillsdale there is a lot of reading. The readings are very difficult, and you're expected to understand them and to write cogent and persuasive arguments about them. And that's really similar to what you end up doing in law school. You read a lot of cases, judicial opinions, where the court is ruling for one side or the other, and you have to dissect the logic, understand it, and then try to articulate how that logic should apply in another case. very similar set of skills, reading, understanding it, and then writing clearly about it.
I know you were a philosophy major. We'll touch on that in just a little bit, but talking about the core curriculum that is required at Hillsdale, how have you seen that help you in your career life?
I think the course is great because it's a necessary exposure to a lot of very, very difficult text. And that's a very useful skill in one's career. I mean, obviously, the primary defense of the core is that they are things that are worth knowing for themselves in their own right. And so, in some sense, defending it instrumentally is kind of missing the point. But it just so happens that reading a lot of works from the Western heritage that are foreign, that are difficult to understand, that actually does end up helping out a lot if you go into something like law.
From the time you graduated to where you are right now in your career, do you mind just telling me what all happened in between there as far as certain positions you held or jobs that you had?
Sure. So I graduated from Hillsdale in 2015, and I went straight to law school at Yale, and that took 3 years. And after that, I went to clerk for a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So earlier I mentioned the courts of appeals. I was a law clerk, which meant that I basically helped him with whatever work he had to do. So primarily that was reading the briefs in a particular case and making a recommendation to him about which side should win and why. And then if there was an opinion to write, we would usually assist him by preparing a first draft and then helping with any other further research that he had about that opinion. So I clerked on a court of appeals in the Ninth Circuit, which was in Oregon, for Judge O'Scanlan. And then after that, I clerked again in D.C. for Judge Griffith. And then after that, I went to work at a law firm, and it's the law firm that I'm currently at, Paul Weiss. And there I practiced mostly appellate law, but now I was doing Supreme Court litigation. So I helped draft a lot of petitions for certiorari, which is basically a request to the Supreme Court to take a case and consider it on the merits. And I also helped out with some merits briefing, so the full briefs before the Supreme Court. I was then fortunate enough to clerk for Justice Alito on the Supreme Court, so I was basically doing the same job I had done for my two other judges, but this time at the Supreme Court instead of at the Court of Appeals level. And now I finished with that, and I'm back at the law firm I've been at for 1 year.
When you were deciding what you wanted to do for a career and you finally decided on law, were you torn between any other career options? And if so, how did you know that this was the right path for you?
Well, I had thought a lot about going into academia and trying to teach philosophy, and I'd also thought about kind of going into business. So those were kind of the two opposing impulses that I had in college. I think what I liked about law was that it felt like a happy medium between those two things. It was an opportunity to do something that requires a lot of difficult cognitive work, but at the same time that was very practical. Law is very practical. You have a client, and the client has interest, and the goal is to assist the client to figure out how best he or she or the company can pursue those interests. Another thing I liked about the law was the idea of a profession. There are responsibilities inherent in it, higher ethical standards. That sounds like a joke to a lot of people who know a lot of lawyer jokes, but it is true. There are high ethical standards to one's clients and to the courts in which one practices, and also responsibility to work towards the public interest through pro bono work, meaning work that's done for free for the public good. And so I liked that, and I liked kind of the mix of practical and intellectual activity.
For alumni or students who are interested in pursuing a career such as yours, would you recommend any sort of internships or job opportunities that they should be looking for?
It can help to do something working in the legal world, but more to know that law is what you want to do. I think that all sorts of backgrounds can succeed and do well in law school. The primary thing is that you're a good reader and a good writer and a good student, and that you can speak well. So particular jobs I don't think that there's anything really specific that you have to do. If you're thinking about law school, it makes sense to get some exposure to someone who knows something about law, just so that you can know what the day-to-day is going to be like. I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about what lawyers do, and so it can be helpful to meet some lawyers, talk to them, figure out what their career paths were, what they do every day, and so on, before you commit to a very pricey degree.
What would you say are some of those misconceptions that people often think about?
A primary one, I think, is that lawyers are arguing all the time. It's that I don't know, they're in the courtroom a lot yelling at people. Actually, a lot of what lawyers do is in the law office, at your computer, doing research to find out what the law requires in a particular case, and then writing memos or briefs, either to your client or to a court or something like that. So there's a lot of oral advocacy, but usually that's pretty far down the line and pretty far advanced in a particular case or in a particular matter that a lawyer's working on. Usually there's a lot of early research to try to understand what the law is, and then some writing to try to explain it before you do a lot of oral advocacy. So I can go back to the example of appellate law. A lot of the case is decided based on the briefs that are filed by the parties. And the way most judges will decide a case in the courts of appeals is they'll read all the briefs in advance, and then they come to argument, sort of oral argument, to test the parties, the specific contentions that they've made, to try to figure out what the facts that are uncertain are, and to probe the weaknesses of the arguments from the briefing that was already presented. But a lot of the work done in advance is done in the brief. So I think that's one misconception.
As a philosophy major, are there any professors you would recommend or any classes you took that had a great influence on you?
I mean, it's a great department. So anybody who was there when I was there is a great professor to take. I would say I took a lot of classes with Professor Cole, and Thomas Aquinas, I would joke, was great preparation for the LSAT because it's a really dense logical argument that you have to understand, and you have to read it like 4 different times to understand it. And if you can unpack that, then you can unpack the questions that they have in the LSAT. Again, I'm defending it on purely instrumental grounds. You should take Professor Cole's classes because they're worth knowing on their own sake. I also took classes from Dr. Schlueter, who, of course, is head of the pre-law program. And I have to give a shout-out to Professor Alex Winston, who is my very dear friend from college who now teaches at Hillsdale.
While you were a student, what were you involved in, and did these involvements help you career-wise in any way?
You know, I mostly just studied, and so I would say that helped me career-wise because I think it was helpful to, again, I said it a lot, practice reading hard stuff that other people think is boring and write about those things. I think there are a lot of ways to do college well. I personally didn't get involved in a ton of stuff, but, you know, I wrote a little bit for the Collegian, and I was a student fed representative briefly, and I was involved in various clubs and so on, but mostly I went to class, I hung out with my friends, and I enjoyed my free time, what was left of it at least.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Garrett.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You have been listening to Beyond the Bubble, a podcast by Hillsdale College Career Services. I'm Lauren Scott, and have a blessed day.